Hello everyone, my name is Adam Sikora and this is my devlog on my project called HoneyHives. This video is specifically about the logic behind validating all of these statements in the blue tiles. So a brief overview is that the goal for this is to make all of these flowers bright. And to make it bright, it needs to be a valid statement in some regard. Um, so if I go like this, 17 does not equal 7, so that makes it not valid, and now it's grayed out. But over here, if I spin it, 2 plus 5 equals 7 is valid, so it's validated. So at first, I tried to think about how I could break this down, and my ideas had to do with my ultimate solution. I really didn't understand how to implement it. So instead, I started over here, and I basically used tons of if statements because I started over here because this has 4 blocks that I need to determine. 1, 7 equals 7. And I didn't tell you, so each flower goes on the axis if you follow the vines for each of these. So 1, 7 does not equal 7. So I first went and just did a bunch of if statements to determine whether this would validate. And I made that work, but then I knew that, hey, I'm going to need to do that same thing with 6 possible digits or 6 possible blocks, which is going to be much more difficult to do if statements. So I really needed to define a better code way to do it. So I kind of went back to my original idea, and ultimately I was able to figure out how to go about doing it. And roughly I would break all of these blocks down and merge them or change them accordingly to get to a final product which would be easy to check whether each side or to check whether it was valid or not. So let's go to some code. So right here I have a description on basically the code or the comments to how I solved it. So what's important to know is that, or the key to solving this was to know that equal statements are very important. So I basically started there and divided things out. Because what I could do is take 2 plus 5 and kind of modify that side and then modify this side if I needed to see if they were equal to each other. So you'll see first right here I have different functions for how many equal signs there are in there. And what I do is I separate it out into left sides of the equal sign and the right side of the equal sign. And I do that right here. I also had to make a custom struct because basically some values, so each of these blocks would be an integer, and that's this. I needed to know what integer it was. So basically I have a custom thing that's called a vine block, and basically all it holds is its value in terms of what type of block it is, and then the actual integer value it would be if it was an integer block. So I basically make a new list that includes everything, that each block in here, and then I separate it out to a left one and a right one. And I go through here and basically, if it's on the left side, it goes on the left, and then I switch it over to the right after a trigger is hit. And meanwhile, I get rid of blanks. That was the easy way to do that. And then I possibly eliminate zeros. And that was, if I'm going back here, this 0 should not be eliminated because it's 70, but this one should because it's in front. So basically I went through the code and found a 0, and if it was before an integer, without an integer before it, then I was able to eliminate it. Then I possibly merge ints. And this was a little difficult. Where is that code? But still, it's a bit of if and it's a bunch of if statements. And basically, I loop through all of it. And if I find an integer, let's go with something different here. If I find one integer, I store it. Then I move on. If I find another one, I store it. But now I have to times this one by 10 and add 1. So basically I took it and said, oh, the last one is 3, times it by 10, so that's 30. 30 plus the 1, now I have the 31. And I would do that down the line to merge my ints. So for this up and down one here, it would merge into 3119. Then it would be a minus block, and then this would merge into its own integer block with just 1. After I did that, I would go through and I would check for plus signs. And I tagged it as not math. So basically, I wouldn't do the math. So if it was just 2 plus 5, I would not handle that yet. I would, you'll see why later. So I take the plus signs that can be eliminated, and I remove them. So for this one here, this is 1 plus. And in this instance, because there's nothing afterwards, this plus actually becomes just a symbol that you would have to match. So to match this, if there was more equal sign, if there was an equal sign and then 2 other units over here, it would need to be 1 plus equals 1 plus. However, if it was the other way, this plus is eliminated, and that's what I do in this function. So if it's a plus and it has nothing before it, or just another symbol before it, and then the 1, it basically designates this as being the integer following it is a positive number, which then I can just delete. Similarly, if I have a negative, it acts the same way, but now I need to do, this would combine into one integer, -1. But I still would not do math for it. But going back to code, I here remove the plus signs, and then here I remove the minus signs, but because I don't want to re-loop everything, I also can handle the math in this one. And here I loop through it, and then if there is if I find a negative, then I look if there's an integer on the left and an integer on the right, which I know that I can assume that it's a combined integer because I combined them earlier. Then I can do this math. So here I basically take the int value of the block of the one prior to the minus sign, if my index is starting here, or my index is currently here on the negative sign. So I take the prior index and I take its int value, and I take the int value afterwards, and then that's simple math. But then going back to this code up here, because I've taken out the minus signs and now I've done the minus math, now I got to redo this up here, and then I just take out the plus signs that only math. So that's basically kind of the same thing with the minus signs. I find the plus sign, find an integer on the left, and find an integer on the right. And I then do that math, and then combine it into its own. I didn't show that. Let me show that. This is the only math. So I get down here again, and I just add this for the index before and an index afterwards. But then I need to remove things. I need to remove the integer before, I need to remove the plus sign, and I need to remove the integer afterwards. And once I do that, I make a new vine block, which is of type of the integer, which is a custom struct or a custom enum. And then this results in the new integer. So basically, I've replaced all of these blocks with the result of it, which is another int block, and then I move on. And that's basically it, because I've kind of parsed through it, and I've gotten here, and basically all my scrubbing is done. Now it's going to be a fairly easy check from each side. If I have a right side and a left side, do the number of elements or blocks in them equal each other? And if they do, then it's possibly going to validate. But then I loop through each of these. If the value itself of the block doesn't match, then it's not going to match, so I return false. But if they are both integers, then I go and check the specific integer value of that, which is stored in that custom struct. And if they don't match, I return false. And if it ever gets here, then I can return true and everything was validated. So that's how it was a fairly long journey. It was like 2.5 days of me like fiddling with this and each function going piece by piece. But I'm glad that I finally got it, because sometimes you get to code problems and at first it just seems like bigger than your ability. But then as is with most of the coding problems that you don't understand, just continually break it down piece by piece, and you'll start to see the sliver of the solution, and then you'll keep working at it, and ultimately you'll find it, hopefully. So yeah, thank you for, oops, that's just showing where you can put other pieces to store. But thank you for watching my video about specifically how I dealt with the coding challenge of validating all of these in code and breaking it all down. Thank you. Have a great day.